Good to see you on this Sunday morning. Hundreds of wildfires are burning across Canada this weekend. The focus this morning is on the situation in Quebec, where additional members of the Canadian Armed Forces are on their way to help fight the fires in that province. Overall, around 40,000 Canadians are out of their homes right now because of the burning. It is a situation officials in Ottawa are calling unprecedented. And on Friday, the Prime Minister said the federal government is ready to help in any way it can.
Communities are being displaced. This is a scary time for a lot of people from coast to coast to coast. Our number one priority is keeping Canadians safe and making sure that they have the support they need.
The person in charge of the planning and support is the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, Bill Blair. I spoke with him just this morning. Minister Blair, thank you for joining us this morning.
Of course.
I guess the situation has improved a little bit in Nova Scotia since you last talked to the media, but it now is worse in Quebec. How do you deal with a challenging situation, happening really all across the country right now?
Well, there's very good coordination. Through our Government Operations Centre, we're in close contact with all of the emergency operations centres in every province. And there's been a lot of work done in preparation for what we knew was going to be a challenging fire season. You're right, the situation seems to be improving fairly significantly in Nova Scotia as a direct result of significant rainfall that they're experiencing there and rain predicted over the next couple of days. The situation is not yet completely under control, and we've still got 8,000 people who've been displaced from their homes, but a lot of people are able to return now, and that's improving. But as you mentioned, the situation in Quebec is now starting to become quite concerning, and there are a significant number of fires, many of them out of control in Quebec, and there are a number of communities and close to 10,000 people that have been forced to be evacuated as a result of those fires.
You and the government keep repeating that this is expected to be perhaps the worst wildfire season we've seen on record. I'm just back from Alberta where they were dealing with it, and it does seem to be really right across the country. How unusual is it for these kinds of conditions, especially so early in the summer?
Well, and Rosemary, Canada experiences wildfires, and frankly, all of our provinces and territories are very well equipped to deal with it, and they have a lot of experience in it. But what we've seen this year is that the fire season started a lot earlier than normal. Certainly in Alberta, we saw an early advent of significant fires. In 2016, the Fort Mac fire was a devastating fire, and I think Alberta certainly learned a great deal from that. A lot of our jurisdictions have had some experience with this, but we're seeing not only an earlier onset to the season, but it's really spread out. And so normally we're able to move resources fairly agilely between provinces to assist with outbreaks, but because the outbreaks have been right across the country, it's presented some interesting and unique challenges for us.
Well, I was going to say, we're already having to bring in firefighters from other countries. That doesn't really bode well for the rest of the summer if we're already having to tap into those resources, does it not?
Well, Rosemary, just be clear, we've always had, we have a Canadian Integrated Firefighting Centre that coordinates the movement of firefighters between provinces and internationally, and it's certainly not without precedent that we've gone to some of our international partners, and for example, the United States, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand. There are a number of other countries, even in Quebec right now. I know there are discussions going on with France about the possibility of bringing firefighters from that country in to assist in Canada. But we also reciprocate, and Canadian firefighters will go during their fire seasons and go and assist there as well. That type of international collaboration is really important. It's always been part of our response, and we've had discussions most recently with the Firefighter Centre, and they say that they're well equipped, and so far the situation that we've had to deal with, as challenging as it has been, has not exceeded their capacity to deliver firefighter resources where they're needed and when they're needed.
I believe the military, Canadian Armed Forces, are in Quebec right now. They are helping out. What about the ones for Nova Scotia? Have they arrived yet, from what you understand?
Yes, there are firefighter resources already deployed in Nova Scotia, and there's 100 people from the 2nd Battalion who are currently training down in Gagetown to be able to assist in that response. And so actually the Canadian Armed Forces have been engaged in the firefighting effort right from the outset, because they had a memorandum of understanding already with the city of Halifax, and so they've been responding to that fire. And now additional resources are being trained and will be there to assist Nova Scotia as they requested as well.
It does beg the question, as you know, that comes up during natural disasters like this about whether we need to have some sort of hived-off part of the armed forces that responds to natural disasters, because they seem to do it all the time anyway, and have those people be properly and continuously train for that kind of thing. What are your thoughts on that idea?
Well, one of the very important functions of the Canadian Armed Forces is domestic response, and they have always been there for Canada and for Canadians. I know I've called upon them very many times in my role as the Emergency Preparedness Minister. You know, they always respond, but they also have a number of other responsibilities, and we know that the domestic responses can impact their ability to train and deploy to other important missions that they're engaged in. And so in every case, I go in and seek their approval in order to make those deployments, but they've always answered the call, as they've done in Nova Scotia, as they've done in Quebec. They responded very robustly in Alberta, and they've always been there for Canadians, and we're grateful for it. But at the same time, I think there are some resourcing issues around recruitment, retention, and training for the Canadian Armed Forces, and we know that it's important to continue to make those investments and to engage in that training.
This new satellite program that the government has announced, Wildfire Sat, is supposed to help detect fires and monitor them from space. It's not going to be in place until 2029. Is there any way for that to happen sooner? Because it seems to me like that would be a useful measure of prevention. Yeah,
of course it is, and it's one of the right reasons we're making a very significant investment. But there's a number of highly technical things that have to actually occur before that system can be deployed. We already have some satellite coverage that's available across the country, but what we are planning on doing is building that out to make sure that every place in Canada has that utility, and so that we can have a better understanding of when fires break out. Now, fire is a naturally occurring event, and not every fire has to be immediately put out, but where there's an interface, where it interfaces, or where there's a danger of interface with populated communities and urban centers, that's where it becomes a significant issue, and the more information we have, the better we're able to respond.
You know, there has been some criticism about the government's prevention planning, namely from the Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston, who has said that he's been told he has to fill out certain forms in order to make it work. Is there something that should be happening to make it easier for provinces to get assistance from the federal government?
Actually, the assistance arrangement that exists is well known in most of the provinces and works very, very robustly. I think there have been some challenges, obviously, in Nova Scotia, partly as there seems to be a little bit of confusion on their part as to what is a reimbursable expense. It seems to be what they're concentrating on, but actually the deployment of the resources, the people, and the equipment that is needed to fight fires, at the operational level, this works very, very well. And certainly we've got some work to do to make sure that we properly are able to assist the province of Nova Scotia, but in every other province, this works very robustly, and we'll make sure it works in Nova Scotia as well.
I want to ask you a couple questions, if I can, about foreign interference, only because you testified in front of the committee last week around some questions for you. I know the government is standing by David Johnston as the special rapporteur, but I wonder, given the will of Parliament, which has been expressed, that he not continue in this role, why does the government why are you not even willing to consider that?
Well, Rosemary, the job that needs to be done it requires someone, I think, of a well-known reputation of service to the country, for integrity and for trustworthiness. And Mr. Johnson, I don't know of a single Canadian that would exceed his reputation for being an incredibly trustworthy and civic-minded Canadian. And as a consequence, we've asked him to do a very difficult job, and he's undertaken it. I appreciate that there are different interests in this matter, and I think our responsibility is to ensure that we are as open and transparent with Canadians so that we can earn their trust and so that they will be trusting that the work of Mr. Johnson and the government in order to address foreign interference is done in the right way, and that people can see that it's being done.
Has he become, though, a distraction because of, fairly or unfairly, has he become a distraction in terms of his reputation and getting in the way of the actual work that needs to be done to do what you're talking about?
Oh, let me I think very obviously that a lot of the partisan attacks that have been leveled against Mr. Johnson have proven it a distraction, but the work is too important to be deterred from the necessity of making sure that this is done and it's done right, to simply be distracted by those partisan attacks. Again, I think our responsibility is to provide reassurance to Canadians that this will be done in a way that they can trust, and that the outcome will help Canada become more resilient, and that we will protect our important institutions like our elections. I think Mr. Johnson is exceptionally able to do that, and hopefully we can work through some of the distractions that you referenced in order to get this job done.
Okay, Minister Blair, I know you're very busy, so thanks for making the time, sir.
Thanks very much. Rosemary, have a good morning.